400,000 is the number. 400,000 usernames and passwords was a call that I got on a Thursday afternoon heading into a weekend of the number of passwords that we were going to have to scramble because of a seemingly network performance issue that we'd been troubleshooting for a couple weeks. Ended up being our SAM database being FTP'd out to a nation state actor. How much of that SAM database had been exfiltrated, we didn't know. But what we did know was 400,000 people were going to come into work and not be able to log into their systems. So you talk about a moment of panic, a moment of fear, right? A moment of what are we going to do? When we talk about cybersecurity, we talk about technology, process, and people. What we often don't talk about is the emotion. And if you're charged with the security of your company and you've just fundamentally failed at that charter, as I did, you have a moment where you kind of look at your badge, you look at the exit, look at your badge, you look at the exit, and you go, what do I do here? And as we were working through this breach, nobody was getting enough sleep. Right? Emotions were running high. Obviously, people in charge wanted to know what happened, why it happened, how will it never happen again, how are we going to remediate this, what are we going to tell people, at the same time, come up with a solution. Right? So we weren't making the best decisions in those moments. As we recovered from that breach, and as we went into forensics and started to figure out what exactly had happened, I realized one thing. Everything that we needed was logged on an access switch or a distribution switch somewhere in our infrastructure. We simply weren't instrumented at the time to detect it in real time. Right? There weren't enough people involved. We had alerts. We had tons of alerts. What we didn't have was context, but the network had it. That's really in those moments where I made the decision to come to Cisco. Because 31 years ago, when Cisco was founded, it was founded on a premise. And it was founded on a premise to connect the unconnected. Right? Our theme, our motto, our mantra was to change the way people lived, worked, learned, and played. As we made those connections, as we connected the internet, as we enabled companies to take advantage of a network environment, we made an assumption. That assumption was that what we were connecting was benign, right? That the altruistic nature of sharing knowledge to improve the world was something that people were going to participate in good faith. Well, as many of you know, the moment we dropped commerce onto the web, it became a malicious entity overnight, in an instant. And that's human behavior, right? Where there's commerce being conducted, where goods and services are being traded, people will intervene. They will try to get at that. We as an industry have been fighting back against that since that moment where the first piece of e-commerce was conducted on the internet. And the state of the industry, has evolved quite a bit, but the more things have changed, the more things have stayed the same. Too many alerts, not enough context. The business impact to breaches is still hard to determine in real time, and there's still way too few of us trying to stop way too many of them. And so that brings us to what are we doing at Cisco? And we've just launched a new initiative to kind of radically simplify the company, because it is a large company. We've extended into cloud, data centers, into collaboration, obviously through the network infrastructure, into security, and then all the things you know us for. But these 5 priorities, embracing a multi-cloud world, reinventing the network, unlocking the power of data through analytics, and the employee and the customer experience, really all have a horizontal play to them. right? And that security is foundational. And that's a top priority for the company at the executive leadership team's level. And the way we look at this is we know perimeters are going to collapse, right? They've already collapsed, right? We know that our environments are going to be elastic, right? And we're going to take advantage of the cloud for all of its benefits. But operating a security paradigm where your perimeter is undefined, where it's elastic, where it grows, where it shrinks, where it moves laterally, if security is not a foundation of a multi-cloud experience, we just don't know what's going to happen. And when people say we're going to reap the advantages of cloud, but we're going to abdicate the security model to that vendor that we're partnered with, we know that answer is not good enough for anybody anymore because we've seen the rise of these breaches, we've seen the PR impact, we've seen the business impact to companies at large scale when they're breached. Reinventing the network, hyperconnectivity creates huge advantages for all of us, but it also creates huge advantages for attackers in the sense that hyperconnectivity and things moving at machine speed means that I can place malware into an environment and have it spread faster than it ever has spread before. And so networks built for reliability simply aren't enough anymore, right? When people say, why would I replace a working network? It's not broken. Well, fundamentally, networks are broken, right? And the reason why they're broken is if they aren't instrumented for security, you're creating a huge gap in visibility, right? This was the gap I faced, right? Where I was trying to pull logs from different places, where I was trying to get sensor data, and everything that I needed was really on the network itself. In analytics, we know business intelligence rules everything, right? Lines of business are reaping the advantages of real-time analytics. Well, security is no different, right? With machine learning and AI and a lot of these emerging trends, the ability to leverage those in a security model are going to give us capabilities that we never had before. And then the employee and customer experience, I leave that for last because we know as IT professionals, if security controls become cumbersome, if security controls prevent the flow of an employee experience, they will circumvent them in 2 seconds. We know this, right? So the employee experience productivity projects that aren't considered through the lens of security, are doomed to either break the security model or doomed to fail in themselves because people demand that their workflows keep up with their personal life, right? If I can do this at home with the applications that I love and know and live my life with, I expect that same experience at work with the applications that are provided to me. We know this to be true. We've seen it in survey after survey. But the security controls that couple with that are equally as important. So these are the 5 ways that we're looking at transforming our company. And I would venture to guess that for many of you, these aren't unfamiliar, that there's a portion of these, maybe all of them, that are operating in your environments today. But then the one thing that we put as a priority is security is everything. Because when I go back to thinking about connecting the unconnected and the mission to really help people digitize their business, it was our responsibility. It is our responsibility as a leading network provider in the world to create a security model that leverages that network, that brings the network into play. 2002 was sort of post-breach forensics for us. And like any breach, and I'm sure many of you have been involved in this, there's many papers that have to be written, right? There's the what happened, there's the why it happened, how's it not gonna happen again. But as part of this project that I was involved in, I was asked to write a paper that said, give me 5 security goals, 5 visions that we can organize towards, that we can build to over the next 3 to 5 years so that we can ensure that we're building a model or a paradigm where this doesn't happen again. And one of those that I wrote at the time was security will be ubiquitous through the very fabric of the network. And my bosses at the time said, yes, that sounds good. That sounds really good. Do that. And I said, we can't do that. They said, well, why the heck did you write it? And I said, remember, you asked me for a vision, right? You asked me for where do we need to go. And they asked me at the time, who can do it? And I said, Cisco. I didn't work for Cisco at the time. And they said, are they planning to do it? And I said, I really don't know. But if they ever did, that would be the move that would allow us to do this. Well, that's where we are, right? Many years later. You know, we always have looked at the network as where to draw our competitive advantage and where to provide capabilities for all of you. You know, we started when we combined voice and data networks, right? We reaped the advantage of a data network of hyperconnectivity to say, let's drive efficiencies in the way that companies communicate, voice over IP. Right? Then we said, well, let's extract more value out of that network by writing codecs that allow us to stream high-definition video anywhere in the world at any time, right? And we extracted value out of the network. We looked at the data center, and we said the way that people are modernizing their data centers have storage, compute, and network all in play. Well, let's leverage the network to combine those three things and bring more value out of the network for the data center. And you saw us when we launched unified computing systems, we collapsed those three things together. So we've continued to look at the network, right, as a place to extract value. And the one place that we realized, you know, 5, 6 years ago when we radically shifted the strategy of the company was we've got to embed security in the very fabric of the network. And those are the moves that we're making now. Now, any security presentation you've ever seen has had a series of stats. Any vendor meeting that you've had, probably that vendor has showed up with some stats, right? Because stats are important. It frames the problem. It shows us what we're dealing with. This is from Forrester 2017. But here's what I would share with you. This was kind of the purpose of those stats. Right? In many cases, these statistics are leveraged in a way from the vendor community to draw a reaction. Right? And this is sort of a humorous picture of one of a haunted house of a family like, huh, right? But this is sort of the emotions that previously were invoked, right? When you thought about, am I breached? What's my impact to being breached? Will I stay in business after my breach? What I contend is we're far past this, right? As an industry, if we're approaching all of you in a manner that says, look at the big, bad, scary things that are going to happen. And by the way, it's happened to all these people, so it might happen to you. You should do something, right? That to me is Bush League. We're far beyond this. Every single person in this room understands the imperative. Every single person in this room understands the severity. I would venture to guess many people in this room have had to deal with the breach, right? In the same ways that I had to. So people are now looking for solutions. Right? And I draw this parallel to an outcome-based model, because that's, I know many of us, right, when we talk to our line of business leaders, they're interested in the outcome, not the process. Right? We've got to move with speed in whatever market that you play in. If you're not moving with speed and agility, your competitors most likely are. And so in security, because of the nature of the business, because threats are developing faster than defenses, because this hyper-connected world are creating more opportunity for threat actors, the entire industry has built a paradigm where we give you the tools, right? And we depend on you to be the systems integrator for your business to say, if you want transportation, build it. You got some great parts, and there are many great parts out there. A lot of our vendors, us and our competitors are building incredible technology. Right? Our competitors in the security space aren't in business because they're not building great product, that they're not leveraging great technology. But the problem still resides, right? That this outcome of security or transportation in this analogy is dependent on you and your partners to build this thing. Whereas we know at the pace of business today, people are saying, I just want to drive it. I don't want to build it. And again, here's sort of how we break this down into some outcomes. We know a well-run business does three things well. right? We increase revenue, we reduce costs, and we reduce risk. Well, if it were all that easy, we'd apply people and technology and process, and we'd be off and running. And sometimes we hit this. Sometimes we hit this magic place in the companies that we work for. We have these three outcomes running at the same time. Now, from a security standpoint, I think boards understand now that security in endpoints, in modern networks, cloud security, and identity services have to be acting as fundamental to whatever project is being let out of IT that leverages technology to help make these things happen. Well, it's not as easy as all that we know, because the acquisition of great technology still requires all of you to adjust to it, to learn it, to implement it. And so there's these things that pull away at our ability to simply go to the line of business, to our CFO's office and say, give me budget to do this thing, and I'll help you reduce cost. Why? Because anything that we introduce is a disruption to your current operating model, right? No matter if it's great technology, if it's the best thing we've ever seen in a POV or a software trial, it's still going to disrupt what you're doing. I don't know a single IT staff or CIO that I've ever met with that says, boy, my team is really not that busy this quarter. I wish we had a couple more projects for my team to execute on, right? Everybody's running, right, at metered speed. There's no time, right, to just add stuff in. So we understand that good technology is still going to be disruptive. If it's a new technology, it may not be a core competency, right? So the time to ramp, the time to learn, the time to optimize these tools can take more time than what the business wants, as they're saying, hey, I want that cost reduction out of this project. Third, the pace of attacks is not slowing down, right? If anything, it's increasing. And I'll cover some trends that we're seeing out of our threat research teams that are making this sort of worse, right? And making the pace of attack pick up even faster than we've ever seen it before. And then last, the visibility to the business impact of breaches is still hard to determine, right? When we know we've been breached, we still don't know the scope of that breach, right? It still takes us time, right? We still take a lot of time in a best-of-breed model to make well-informed, context-filled decisions. We're making decisions, right? But oftentimes we're missing the context, right? So we don't know how well-informed that decision is to the eventual business impact of the breach. Now, what we're trying to do to bring that to bear, or trying to tame that beast, if you will, the first thing that's an imperative is a global threat grid, right? Malware that's authored in Estonia as we sit today is going to be deployed in Los Angeles in the matter of seconds, right? That's the nature of our hyper-connected world. And so if your aperture, right, is not as wide to take in a global view of a threat landscape, you're simply just missing stuff, right? This is a notion where, in any type of intelligence function, whether it's signals intelligence, people intelligence, cyber intelligence, the more sensors you have, the better fidelity you have in your data. And so it's incredibly important for us at Cisco to maintain a global threat grid. Second, intelligence gathered is useless if it's not shared, right? And we've seen this in the born identity. We've seen this play out in actual life, right? Where a piece of intelligence that isn't shared in real time to all the agencies that need it is useless. It's the same in cybersecurity. The paradigm doesn't change. So if you've got a great product on an endpoint that's delivering threat intelligence, but it shares nothing with the network, you're missing stuff, right? So what we're aggressively focused on is within our security solutions that we share threat intelligence at machine speed. So when you see malware on an endpoint and it's a 0-day sample and it walks like a duck, it's got feathers, right? You're kind of saying, hey, that's a duck. We're sharing that instantaneously with our network sensors, with our email gateways, with everything that acts in the architecture. We know if you put people into that process, that takes time, right? If you're in one system and say, ooh, that's a good piece of intelligence, let me open a ServiceNow ticket to make sure we update the rest of the infrastructure, we know that doesn't scale, right? That is an imperative that shared threat intelligence at machine speed allows us to push back on some of these disruptors. And then the holy grail, what we're all after, automated remediation. Right? And automated remediation simply can't happen without the network in play. Right? The network itself is the communications vehicle, right, or vessel for packets, for information, for applications, for analytics, for it all. And what we're moving towards is a paradigm with that global threat grid, sharing threat intelligence across our solutions to interact with the network fabric. Right? And the network fabric saying, I'm aware, I understand context, and I can shut down parts of the network, remediate parts of the network, quarantine parts of the network in an automated fashion without the need for a ticket being opened in the environment. That's the paradigm that we need because a prevent-only model simply isn't going to work. Right? It's like many of us as parents sending our kids off to the first day of school saying, we're going to give them some medicine and I guarantee they won't get sick. They're going to get sick. We know this. Right? Businesses are going to be breached. And they're going to be breached in a rapid fashion. It's not a matter of preventing a breach. Right? Because the demands of your business to increase revenue, reduce costs, and reduce risks are going to extend your business to other businesses. The partnerships that you make are going to be built on a trust model. Right? And that trust model is going to be derived from policy. It's going to be derived from compliance models. It's going to be derived from the sharing of technology. But we know that's fallible. We've seen that as fallible. And so we also have to understand that the real benefit is in the remediation, the speed of the remediation, the scoping of the impact, and the leveraging of all assets at our disposal. And the network being absolutely ubiquitous, right? Touching everything that we do. What we think this delivers is leverage. Right? When we talk about solutions, any solution, and in security in particular, we talk about efficiencies and we talk about, can a single solution cover multiple families of threats across multiple asset classes? If it can do that, because it has a global threat grid, because it shares threat intelligence, and it brings the network into play for remediation, I've got real leverage. I've got real leverage in my solution where I can then look for quick technology wins, right? Where I can understand my project scope is full, where I can understand that new technology takes a learning curve. If I have leverage in systems and I can say, here's multiple families of threats across multiple assets, that's a quick win. That's a quick win to deliver leverage because at the end of the day, right, a security vision is nothing without the outcome. And when we talk about this in layman's terms, we simply need to see more, block more, and respond faster. That's the game we're playing as an industry, right? That's the game we're playing as in partnership with you. So what, right? What is Cisco built? Well, this concept we think is a best of platform type of concept. And we still understand the SIEM industry will be around to ratify a lot of this data. We understand there's going to be partners that will need to be, that you will have to outsource to. And there's still going to have to be security analysts, right? This isn't the holy grail, right? There still needs to be those functional pieces of operating a cybersecurity framework. But we feel this best of platform is going to give context-aware, well-informed data to make better decisions in a quicker amount of time. And you look at the product list that's up there in the green blocks. You know, those product lists, there's a host of competitors out there that make great technology to fill in those blocks, and you're probably leveraging many of them today. That's not to say that those things don't work. That's not to say that their threat intelligence isn't good. It is. The issue becomes how do we share it, and who's building a framework to share it. And the secret sauce to the entire Cisco security architecture is this concept of PX Grid. And the concept of PX Grid is basically we've opened up all of the APIs in all of our solutions. right? So any one of our product teams can write to the other product. Any competitor in the industry that's interested in building into the ecosystem can write to those open APIs. They're published and available. Right? That is how you share threat intelligence at machine speed. Right? The products that we launch and we develop are all part of the architecture. So they all talk into PX Grid. Now an example, healthcare. Right? We understand connected devices are going to come into the environment at a rapid pace, even faster than we see it today. But we also understand that those manufacturers, in a lot of cases, have closed systems for all the right reasons. So we can't really put agent technology on those endpoints, right? They're closed OSs. So you look at deception companies that are starting to come out with technology that says, I'll emulate that medical device and I'll make it look like a big vulnerable target and I'll let somebody attack that target and I'll understand what accounts they're using, I'll understand their techniques, the tools that they're using, right? That's a really valuable technology. The CEO of that company approached me at a show and said, can we get into this PX Grid? Can you set us up with your business units? And I asked him why. And he said, because we're valuable on our own. But oh my gosh, if we can play into the network. If what our system does can interact with the network to create separation zones, to create zero trust models across different parts of the network, we've gone from valuable to indispensable. And so this PX Grid concept is available to anybody, and we're starting to see people come into that ecosystem at a rapid pace because the network is now available as part of the security apparatus, right? It's alive. It's detecting, it's sensing, it's not just sitting and passing packets. Another trend that we see is a move to the next version of TLS, right? And maybe, I don't want to go too deep into TLS, but understand that the previous versions of TLS allowed for inline detection capabilities. We could sit and intervene in between encrypted flows and say we can decrypt them at times, we can read the top parts of headers, and we can do things like web scan or email scan, firewall. We can do all these types of fancy techniques. Well, with this next version of TLS, game over, right? Because IETF has said with the industry that the encryption from the application and the endpoint, from the user to the application is everything. So it's not exposing information in the header that it generally did that we could apply inline detection. So what do we do? Well, we saw this coming and we started developing techniques. One of them called encrypted traffic analytics, right? Where we looked at what we can do with our infrastructure platforms, and our Catalyst 9000s were the flagship of this. We still spin our own ASICs. We still make our own ASICs. We make our own ASICs because we can leverage that IP to build advanced capability into those ASICs. And built into that ASIC is the ability to run machine learning algorithms, 5 of them to be exact, across encrypted traffic without unencrypting it at data rate and determine anomalous traffic behavior within encrypted flows, enabled on the network infrastructure. These are things that we felt we had to do. We had to do to help drive the industry, right? To say the network itself will have to come into play, but if encryption is going to be from the user to the application and nowhere will we intervene, well, the network has to come alive, right? The network has to see some of that. So a modern network infrastructure that's enabled with something like encrypted traffic analytics is incredibly important to this platform. And then last, Talos, our threat research organization, the largest non-governmental threat research organization in the world. It's grown. We acquired a lot of it through the acquisition of SourceFire, right, and Snort, which we may be very familiar with. But we've added to that threat research team in headcount, in capabilities. And now what they're seeing is the ability to block 20 billion threats a day. 20 billion is a massive number when it comes to automated blocking of threat data. The reason why they can do 20 billion is because the aperture of their threat intelligence is this big. Because they're taking in sensor data from switches, from routers, right, from email gateways. Our acquisition of OpenDNS, right, we're seeing all of those DNS requests. So we've taken all of that and put it into one view with one threat research team to deliver scale that hasn't been seen in the industry. Now we absolutely partner with other companies and their threat research arms, and they've got great ones. But the differentiator for TLS is simply the scale. And we visualized it here to kind of show you what it would look like, right? Because 20 billion as a number sitting on a piece of paper next to another number is like, that's pretty good. But this is actually what the scale looks like compared to published results from other people in the industry. What I want to caution here is that those little bubbles don't mean bad. There's some great threat research in there. In fact, we share that as an industry. But what it means is scale, right? What it means is global, right? That's what the ability that we have because the network has come into play. Now, what's new at Cisco? We talked about encrypted traffic analytics. I hope that comes out a little bit, but I wanted to share sort of what it looks like in a report fashion. So when you enable encrypted traffic analytics and you run our StealthWatch technology over the top of it, you're able to get visibility you hadn't seen before. And in this case, 1.4 terabits, I think, is what the number says there of encrypted traffic that's outbound, right? Part of this report will show you where that traffic is going, and it'll classify it if it's going to high-risk countries. When we ran some pilots of this with a customer in Michigan, it was a regional health system, clinics all throughout Michigan, and they had 4 machines that had encrypted flows going to Lithuania and Estonia. And they looked at that, they looked at the report and they said, what is that? We said, well, we don't know what that is, but we know it's going there. They said, we don't have any clinics there. We don't have any business partners there, right? So this ability for us to look into the very flow of the traffic, right? Even encrypted traffic, and deliver results that would allow us to apply different threat hunting techniques with other parts of the infrastructure is starting to become very important, right? As network flows start to explode out of your prem, to explode out of the cloud providers that you're using, explode to cloud providers that you're using for SaaS-based applications, where this encrypted traffic is going is imperative that we understand it. Now, all this integration that we did on the back end is good, it's lovely. But our customers came back to us and said, that's cool, but I'm still logging into different stuff, right? If I'm a SOC operator and I've got all this Cisco product that's sharing threat intelligence, that's operating at machine speed, why am I still logging into 3 things? That's a good point, point taken. So we've been working very hard to take that back-end integration and put it to the front, to the operator view. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the operator and their access to signals intelligence, to threat intelligence, and endpoint data. And so what we developed here is a technology called Cisco Threat Response, formerly known as visibility. And what this does, it takes in all of our endpoint technology, all of our cloud security technology, and it gives you a view of the machine, the endpoint, the malware that's on that endpoint, and where that host has been talking to. So it creates this spider web of communication that says everything that we know from a DNS standpoint, from a network flow, from a malware standpoint, from our threat grid cloud analysis of zero-day malware, this is it. Now, big problem for me as a threat hunter, we didn't call ourselves threat hunters back then, we were just the security dudes, was keeping track of all this information, hashes, IPs, DNS, right, reverse lookups. This now has the ability with a single right click to create a case notebook for your operator, right? To not stop the flow of the investigation, but simply say right click, put that information in a casebook, right? Because we'll talk about some mega trends that are happening, and one of them, I'll preview it, is lawyers, 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 lawyers. They're everywhere when a breach happens. So maintaining chains of custody and evidence used to be the realm of deep forensic specialists. Well, that chain of custody now has to start at the operator. And what we're trying to do with this technology is give the tools to the frontline operator to say, anything you want to know about this architecture leverage, the security technology that we're developing, you can get through one single screen with a series of right clicks and build your case notebook and your incident response alongside of it in real time, right? That's leverage. That's what we're trying to bring to the forefront. Not just develop single products to compete against single products in the industry, right? That's how we got here, right? That's why many of you are using 10 vendors, 15 vendors. I've even heard of 40 vendors in large organizations. What has that gotten us? It's gotten us some great technology. It has gotten us advanced capability. Those aren't bad decisions. They weren't malicious decisions. When I built it, and people would come in and ask me like, why did you build this? You got all these tools. My standard response was one good tactical decision at a time. That's how we built this, because we're doing our jobs, right? Just as all of you are doing your jobs to defend your companies against threats, right? Our responsibility, especially as a leading network provider, is to start to bring these tools to the forefront for the purpose of the operator taking advantage of those differentiators. Now, we just acquired Duo. Duo, I think we spent a lot of money on Duo. I forget the exact, but it was in the billions. And why did we acquire Duo? Well, when I have this talk, and I talk to a lot of CISOs around the country, you know, and one in particular in Atlanta was like, I love this story. I love the network coming alive. You know, he told me it's about dang time, right? But I love it. I love this ability to take these things and put them into one place. He said, but here's the problem with you. The only thing that's going to bind me to my company in 2 to 5 years is my identity. It won't be my device. It won't be my IPs. It won't be the network. It won't be anything, because my users are going to exist in a multi-cloud world, gaining services from cloud providers, sending service data to cloud providers. The only thing that's going to bind me to my company is my identity. And he said, I love what you're doing, but what you're doing is you're consuming identity. Right? You're assuming through your threat analytics, through your identity services engine and how you play into the network, that Paul's identity is actually Paul. What if it's not? And he was right. It was a gap in our portfolio. So we went out and we looked at companies, and Duo came to the forefront for us, and we made the acquisition because we need not to be the program of record for identity, right? There's many players out there that are doing that. Microsoft Active Directory, places like that that own your usernames and passwords. What Duo's purpose is to sit on top of that and say that every factor that we can bring into bear can be leveraged to ratify that identity. So it was a key acquisition for us. You know, as zero trust models start to become more and more the norm, our zero trust model for networks, the center of it was our identity services engine, right, which is the capability to leverage the network for policy based on user attributes. Now with Duo, we look at this as our zero trust model for applications. And we'll bring those capabilities together, but it was a key acquisition for us to fill in the key parts of what we thought are going to change, you know, in the IT environments as perimeters, you know, potentially completely collapse. All right, and different models of compute and different models of productivity are going to be based squarely on the identity of the user. So I'll cover some top trends that we're seeing, and one of them that, well, let me start with the lawyers right in the middle. Our incident response teams that you can either procure from an always-on retainer, or you can procure in an emergency. These are world-class threat hunters, project teams that come in, apply the Cisco tools sets, right, to help detect breach or help find patient zero and help businesses recover as part of our services arm. Well, when we talked to them, they said, when we first, in 2017, maybe every 5th incident we had a lawyer on the phone. In 2018, the lawyer runs the call. In most cases, legal either outside counsel or inside counsel, is on the phone from the beginning, right? Because we understand the PR impacts now are greater than they've ever been. Chain of custody is important. Attribution, right? Whether we're dealing with corporate espionage or nation state actors, those change who gets involved. And so we're seeing a ton of legal entities come into the paradigm, which again, for us as IT professionals, means we have to react to that in a different way, right? The way that we preserve evidence, the chain of custody, the tool sets that we use become more imperative, more important to have really good data. Automation's working for hackers. We saw this, in the big outbreaks of last year, the NotPetya, the WannaCries, right? Because they were leveraging automation to copy malware and place it into places at machine speed. So it's more we use automation to help us drive productivity. Well, the threat actors are using the same automation to develop attacks at scale that we haven't seen before, and that we'll continue to see people try to attempt, right, at mega scale. And that leads me sort of to the crypto mining. When we talk to our threat intelligence, they make the joke that like ransomware, like, oh, that was so 2017, right? And we asked them about this rise of crypto mining malware. They had an interesting response, and one I hadn't thought of that I wanted to share with you. A lot of threat actors were throwing ransomware out, right, to any vulnerable host without really a care of where that ransomware was landing. Well, we had an incident in Southern California of a hospital system, prescription system being locked up by ransomware, right? So just write some scripts. Well, if you're in healthcare, those days are long gone, right? Everything is now delivered on an IT platform. They had to shut down their ICU. They physically had to take ICU patients out of their facilities. There was a fleet of ambulances going to their facilities and transferring them to sister organizations, and they had their own ICU capacity problems. So could you imagine, right? God forbid any one of our loved ones were in that ICU and had to be transported with risk to their very life because of ransomware? Like just ransomware thrown out in the world that happened to get locked up on a prescription system? So we started to see this, and the reactions, obviously, to locking up an ICU aren't just pay the ransom and move on, right? Local law enforcement wants to know about that. If it comes from a nation state actor, the FBI wants to know about that. So your chances of being caught as a threat actor when you're putting ransomware on healthcare systems rises dramatically. And at the end of the day, this is just a money-making operation. These threat actors, all they want is cryptocurrency put into their digital wallets with ransomware. So we saw this change in threat actors going, why would I risk that exposure when all I really want is cryptocurrency? I'm going to use the same delivery mechanisms. I'm going to use the same technology. I'm just going to change the source code, and I don't need to lock up that system. I just need to use its CPUs to mine Bitcoin for me. So crypto mining malware exploded in 2018, and we're still seeing massive samples of crypto malware being put out into the industry. And this isn't just targeted at the largest customers, the largest businesses in the world. It's actually preferably targeted at mid-sized businesses, right? Because as threat actors look at it, they go, well, if a system just kind of slows down on performance, that could take people a long time to figure out what's going on with it if they don't have a robust security infrastructure, right, that's sharing threat intelligence as a global view, all of that, right? So we started to see this crypto mining rise. And I wanted to kind of give you a view of it because, philosophy is good, architecture is good, but how does it really work, right? And down the side there, you see Cisco's advanced malware protection. We apply this into our email gateways. We apply this onto the network. We apply this into our AMP for Endpoints product. And so it runs pretty ubiquitously, and its purpose is to work with Cisco Threat Grid to determine whether we've got malware running or if we've got zero-day malware. You see Cisco Firepower, which is our next generation firewall capabilities, and then Cisco Umbrella, which was the OpenDNS acquisition, and then our email security gateways. So this is how the architecture would come to life in an incident where we're looking at crypto mining. So first, Cisco AMP, our email gateway. would look at and scan those attachments and say, look, that looks like crypto mining software. Our endpoints would do a incident of compromise trigger when we're seeing known crypto mining software trigger. And then Cisco Threat Grid, right, which is taking samples in from all over the infrastructure. And actually, as customers, you can submit samples of files you see yourself into the threat grid. And then we explode those in a sandbox. And we provide criteria against malware. And we say, does it walk like a duck? Does it talk like a duck? Like, we don't know what that is, but we're going to make an assumption, pretty sure that that's a duck. In this case, that it's crypto mining software. That threat grid alert goes out to the AMP product, to email, through Cisco Firepower, and to Umbrella to create blocking signatures in real time. So if a host hasn't been infected, and we see that, we can block it at the network layer. If a host has in fact been infected, Cisco AMP will see that, right? And clean it, quarantine it, or it will act with the network to make that quarantine happen. So this is an example of like when all is said and done, right, this is what the architecture will look like and will perform as with a new type of trend of malware that we're seeing out in the industry. So the obvious question is, but what about devices that I don't own but are on my network? These are starting to become very prevalent in everybody's industry, whether it's contractors, business partners, et cetera. So how will I detect if I've got malicious cryptocurrency mining operations happening in my environment on hosts that I can't put my agents on hosts that I don't own? Well, this is where encrypted traffic analytics comes to life. Because even if you don't own those devices, you own your network, and you own your network infrastructure. And so we'll look within those encrypted flows, and we'll make, with our machine learning algorithms, determinations to say, this really looks like crypto mining behavior that we've seen moving laterally across other networks. And we're going to make a determination that you probably got some malware here. And then we're going to interact with the Cisco AMP for endpoints through the threat response capability to say, and here's that endpoint. And here's who else it's communicating to within your infrastructure. So wrapping up, key thoughts at Cisco. Number one, instrumenting the network for security. That was our imperative. Going back to connecting the unconnected. This is our obligation. It's our responsibility. And we made definitive moves to bring the network infrastructure alive as part of the security apparatus. Share threat intelligence across solutions, right? If we're not doing that, we're not doing you a favor as an industry. Right, we've got to connect these tool sets together to give you more well-informed context-aware decisions. And then lastly, see more, block more, respond faster. This is the game. Don't let perfect get in the way of better. Right? Incremental improvements in your security model are exponentially valuable to your companies. Right? If we can deliver true architecture leverage, and we can tie ourselves as security professionals, as IT professionals, to those projects that are going to increase revenue, reduce costs, and reduce risk, and we do that in an incremental fashion, there is no silver bullet. Right? Breaches are going to happen. We're going to continue to have to grow as an industry to respond to these threats and emerging threats we don't know of. But better is absolutely valuable. And I'll close with this. Let's not let perfect get in the way of better. Thank you for your time. It was a pleasure to be with you this morning.